Hey everyone, welcome to the Better Together podcast. I'm here with my friend Seth Schmidt. He's an incredible coach, leader, really gifted human being, but he also just carries like some authentic rawness to him, which I love. He carries that with him in the professional world and also has an incredible relationship with his wife, with his kids, and is just somebody I really deeply admire and have just grown to really care about in the past year. So it's just going to be really fun to have a conversation with him about how he is creating collaboration and unity in
Mm.
his context. And you'll get to hear a few like frameworks and ideas that he lives by, and hopefully get some practical takeaways on unity and collaboration. Whether you are a mom, you are a husband, wife, you're a business owner, pastor, or you're just trying to figure it out, whatever that situation might be that you're living in. Hopefully, we get to give you some really practical principles on unity and collaboration through the stories that we share and through the conversation that we have. So, Seth, thank you so much for being willing to hop on this. It was pretty last minute. We actually were talking this morning, and I was like, dude, we need to do a podcast. Will you jump on? And he was really excited to do it. So thank you, Seth.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah. Why don't you share a little bit of what you do, your background, how you ended up becoming the man that you are today?
Yeah, of course. I grew up in the Tustin, Santa Ana area, went to Point Loma for college, and spent quite a number of years traveling in my 20s, which was such a great experience, just experiencing other parts of the world, dropping into YWAM bases, surfing, all kinds of fun adventures. And ended up coming back and working at Grace Fellowship Church with junior high ministry for 3.5 years. And that's where I met Deanna, my wife. And we've been married for 16 years and have three daughters currently now. And, you know, when you're living with your in-laws and you're pregnant with your first child and you don't have a job and you're 26, the professional world starts calling, right? And say, hey, what will you be? What will you be up to? And I ended up working for 8 years in our family manufacturing business, manufacturing cranes, and had an incredible run of just restoring relationship with my dad and learning how to run a business with him and having a really cool redemptive moment with him to get that attaboy son, you're pretty good at this, which every son craves and loves. And so that was a really restorative season with him. And we ended up selling that company. And the question was, what will Seth do next? And I knew deep, meaningful people work was really what I was designed for. I just came alive in any sort of conversation where we were exploring up the human, the person at work, the possibilities of what you can create in work. And I was thinking about becoming a therapist. I had done the pastor thing for a season, and brother-in-law invited me to check out this coaching firm, Novus Global, and they do executive coaching. Had no idea what it was, but ended up doing a month-long immersive deep dive into that space, and was like, where was this when we were running the crane company? And this is exactly what I want to do.
Yeah.
And so I ended up investing basically a master's degree level amount of money
Mhm.
into this apprenticeship program and built a coaching practice, an executive coaching practice. And in 2018 is when I started and have been at it ever since. Recently, I decided to step out of Novus in the last year and step out into my own practice. And it's been this just incredible space where I'm inviting men who are up to big things, leaders that are creating impact and change, uh, and really the foundation of it is really the company's called FORTIV, so it's a mashup of two Latin words, fortis and vivis, and fortis means strength and courage, and vivis is to be alive, and so when you put those together, it creates this word alive with courage. And when I think of men stepping out and leading powerfully and offering their strength to the world, that snapshot of being alive with courage just captures
Mm.
how I want to be living my life and the space I want to be holding for leaders who are stepping out to create things that they never thought possible. So that's really what I do is I get to hold a space for leaders to emerge into their next level of growth and step out into the frontier lands of the things that they're called to do.
Mm. Dude, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that you sold an amazing crane company. That's so cool.
Yeah, it was definitely a cool season of deciding like, will Seth take this on into the next generation, or are we going to make a bold break here to go pursue something else? And definitely was a fun adventure to step out of that season and into a new season of coaching.
Dude, that's so cool. Uh,
Yeah.
so one of the things that I found just really intriguing about the way that you live, the way that you talk,
Mm,
some of the things that you mentioned during our coaching is a very distinct paradigm shift between the way that most men live uh,
hmm,
and the way that you're challenging other men to live alongside you. You talked about, you used the word like frontier lands. You talked about like going out and doing amazing things. Like
hmm.
you mentioned like creating something out in the world. Um, what do you think is the difference between like the way that most people live and the way that you're trying to call out life in others?
Mm. Yeah, that's good. Well, I think naturally just being human in the human skin, our brains are wired for comfort, they're wired for efficiency, and they're wired for survival. And so at any given day, your brain is just saying, how can I keep you alive and keep you safe and keep all systems running in the most efficient way possible? Unfortunately, that conflicts at times with the potential and the fullness of your creativity in what you've been made for. And I think there's this really healthy, powerful tension there where, when you start popping the hood and getting under the hood of how someone's made, what their giftings are and what they're made for, and you start inviting them into vision and start creating this snapshot of the future that creates passion and energy for them, you start discovering all kinds of treasures. And you're like, whoa, like who's this person? I didn't even know that this was in their skill set or their heart or the desires of what they want to create. And so I think just most people aren't having that conversation. They're not going out to lunch or going out to coffee with somebody, and the person sitting across from them is not asking them, "Hey man, what are you capable of this year?" And so I think there's just an absence of just a space to go work that out, and that's really what I'm excited in is because I see, if we're made in the imago Dei of the creator, and so that means that we have these creative capacities to go create things that we don't even understand ourselves, and it takes a space to go pull that out. And then when you start getting that on paper and someone starts actually connecting with it and their brain starts going like, whoa, that could be my future reality,
Mhm.
it gives the brain a new project to go be right about. Instead of just survival and efficiency and comfort, it actually invites them into a new adventure, a new frontier land that would that could be worth risking for or having faith for. And I think that when that nexus point happens and a person decides to jump and to go step out into the unknown of what they're to go explore what they're capable of, it just floods their life with adventure, with fulfillment, with creativity, and like all these like sometimes dormant capacities just start clicking into gear.
Mhm.
And to me, I've just found it to be such an incredible way to live because you're living at the edges of like what you're capable of, who God has made you to be, and you actually need faith a lot more because there's a lot more unknowns that you're facing, but it oftentimes is very thrilling for people to step into a life like that.
Dude, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So, you had mentioned John Eldridge to me when we first met, and
Yeah.
I had somebody mention his book Wild at Heart like 3 months ago and didn't pick it up. And then a few days ago, I started listening to the audiobook, and I'm like in the middle of
Mm.
chapter one.
Mm.
Some of the things that you mentioned kind of struck me and reminded me of what you said. But he talks about how in every like boy there is a desire for like danger and adventure,
Mm.
and it seems like you live that way. When you encounter people, do you feel like their um, maybe comfortability with danger or with adventure or risk, like you mentioned, is a normal thing, like a normal way people are living, or do you feel like they're living a little differently? And what are you doing in your conversations with some of the men that you're working with to
Mm.
kind of give them the like that taste that their soul really desires for
Mm.
adventure or risk or danger?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. John Eldridge has been a huge influence for me over the last 3 years, and he says the three core heart desires of a man are an adventure to live, a battle to fight, and a beauty to rescue. And the more that I try those on and keep throwing them at different men that I work with or in different relationships that I have, those three seem to always continue to pop back up. It's like, yep, yep, yep. Like that is the heartbeat of a man, among other things. But that those are three big key points. And that adventure to live piece is huge because I think adventure is everywhere. Like, and but sometimes we're not trained to see it, and so for example, like there's conversations with my wife that I want to have with her, but tend to avoid or want to go passive and move away from. And it's like when I reconnect to my vision of like what I want for my relationship with her and what we want to create together, like my vision's like calling, like raising my hand for me, saying, "Hey, like you can't walk away from this adventure in this conversation with her." And so I think adventure is everywhere. Like pursuing my teenage daughters, another example. Like there's a comfortable, efficient, safe way to do that, and then there's an adventurous way to do that that like takes them into spaces, conversations, experiences that maybe I've never done before, or but I know is part of my vision for how I would love to launch them into this world, right? So I think I think for some guys, like we start especially for guys that have young families and kids, you start just getting into this rhythm where it's like, I go to work, I'm the provider, I come home, tuck my, just check, check, check all the things that need to happen of kids in the bath, reading, get him to bed, watch a show and go to bed with my wife or something. It's like it becomes this the world it becomes a more of just a smaller version of like what could be possible for their life. And so I'm interested in just having conversations with guys and saying, "Hey man, like what's out in the frontier lands? What are the things you would love to create?" And oftentimes it's just a lack of vision. Like no one's just ever asked them like, "Hey, what's your vision for your marriage?" Or "Hey, what's your vision for the way you raise your sons?"
Right.
Or what's your vision for how you want to progress in your work this year? Like, and so and then it's like I said earlier, once you start pulling that out and getting it on paper, the brain starts going like, wow, that looks pretty killer. That looks like something I'd love to go after. And then the adventure comes back into the system of like, well, I've never done that before. I've never been that person before. And it's like, I know, but this is what you're made for. This is what you're designed for. What if we could go after it? So yeah.
Mm. I think what's emerging for me, especially in the area of relationships, is that there is like a clear trajectory for being able to see what the frontier lands hold,
Mm,
especially in a relationship like in a marriage or even a relationship with coworkers or a team.
mm,
Like obviously our podcast is all about like unity. You can't have unity on your own. Uh,
mm,
and there's multiple like areas where you can create unity. Like Ian always likes to talk about the concentric circles. Like in the center, there's you and your relationship with God. Even when you feel like you're all by yourself, like you're still in relationship to God, to your Creator.
mm,
Um, and then the second one could be like in a marriage, like one of the deepest relationships that you could have. Um, and then one outside of that could be like family, like kids and the household. And then the one beyond that could be like a community that you're a part of. It could be like close friends or church community or work.
mm,
But from what you're saying, I'm kind of putting together the pieces and I'm noticing there is like a little bit of a like a journey that you take people on.
mm,
I think the first one that emerges, you've mentioned it a few times, is a clarity of vision. Uh,
mhm,
and then a second one is like something that I've learned from you, like identifying the gaps, which I think could be synonymous or actually be parallel to risk and adventure.
mhm,
So people see it as like, what am I missing? And other people can see it as like, where is there opportunity for risk or adventure? Uh,
mhm,
and then I think the next one could be like living in the impossible and like seeing what comes of it.
mhm,
So I want to talk about the first one about vision, especially in the context of a relationship. How do you create vision in a relationship? Like, let's just use a marriage as an example. And then also, like, what are key components to a helpful vision? And then how does that clear vision change like the rest of the trajectory of your relationship?
Yeah. Yeah, so my definition of a vision is just simply like a snapshot of the future that produces passion and energy. Like you look at that thing and you're like, man, I would love for our life to look like this a year from now, right? Um, Recently, my wife and I have been like just talking a lot about Sabbath and about like what does it look like to have a day where like there's rest, there's enjoyment, there's peace. And I think vision just starts with really just kind of excavating the desires on the heart, and I think John Eldredge's work has been really helpful for me to really to really see my heart as being a place of goodness, that there's some good stuff in there that like wants to come out and wants to be seen and wants to be lived in the world. And so really just excavating the desires of your heart and starting to map like, hey, what does a Sabbath day look like? What would we love to create? And then obviously there's resources out there that can help backfill some of that, or maybe some good practices that kind of can go along with it. But I think like it's excavating, and then it's having some sort of clarity where it's like I said, it's on paper. And then I think specificity, because if you just said, hey, we want to do some more Sabbath days, like your brain just kind of spins a bit there because it's not specific enough. You could do one Sabbath a year and call it good, and it didn't really hit the heart of what you're trying to create with the Sabbath rhythm. So I think specificity is a huge thing where you push that vision, let's say down a funnel that keeps pushing it down towards specificity. So it's like, okay, so what are the three things you're going to have in every Sabbath thing, or how many Sabbaths do you want to do a month, right? And as soon as you say we want to do, 3 Sabbaths a month, your brain goes, okay, cool. So let's pull out the calendar. What Sabbath days are they, right? Like, when does it start? When does it stop? Like all these things start clicking into gear because your brain now has some clarity and specificity to start designing towards. So I think those are some really key starting points for like how you create vision. And then I think also too, inviting someone else into the vision to say, hey, here's our crappy first draft of what we think Sabbath could look like. And just to have somebody hold a space to say, just to push a little bit, because we all have these what we call Novus Global, the coaching firm I worked with, they coined this term the intuitive fence. We all have this intuitive fence of what we think we're capable of, and what's possible for us. So someone might say, yeah, I want to do one Sabbath a month. And and uh, and then someone might say, well, why not four? And they're not saying you should do four, but they're just inviting your brain to ask, well, why not four? Like what's coming up for you as you sit with like a weekly, everyday Sabbath rhythm. And and it's really interesting to hear what comes from the brain. Like, oh, well, we have baseball, or we have things going on like that can't do that, or every week, that's a lot. So it just starts, the brain starts telling on itself of like what gaps are emerging and why you haven't been able to kick this whole Sabbath rhythm off even in the first place. And I think that's where working with a coach, or even just working with somebody that really cares about your growth, can actually just start listening to how you're talking about the gaps, because your language will give away how your vision occurs to you, or how the gaps occur to you. And then you start getting into mindset work, which is a great mindset and heart work, really, where you start excavating how somebody gets in their way of creating the things that are on their heart, or the vision that they want to create. And that's a really fun process of just starting to explore mindsets that aren't serving, or they're limiting
Mm,
different vision in your life, and we can start looking for new mindsets that might help serve what you're trying to create. And so, yeah, that to me, those are some fundamental pieces of like what does it look like to create vision and start setting forward on something, a new adventure.
mm. So, if you're working with, let's say, like a business partner, or
Mhm.
you're in a marriage and you're, trying to create a specific vision for your marriage, or, I mean, there's so many other team environments we can list off, but
Yeah.
obviously there will be like conflicting desires, conflicting visions, or even like diversity within that specific vision.
Yeah.
How do you work alongside somebody with like diverse like levels of motivation and
Mm,
like even goals and outcomes that they have, and like have clarity, while also still like retaining the beauty of the diversity in the conversation. Like, I mean,
yeah.
a marriage is a great example because you're coming from two completely different backgrounds, households, like
Mm,
upbringings, and then even in my case, like different cultures.
yeah.
But you're wanting to create something together, and live into it, and not, waste time trying to figure out the vision, but also living into it at the same time. So how do you do that with multiple people's voices in the room?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I play with this conversation this question all the time with clients and, business partners or stakeholders or people that they're aligning on vision with. I think the merit to align on vision with marriage is probably the pinnacle, the crucible of expert yeah, yeah, what I'm trying to say is the marriage situation, sorry, what I'm trying to say is the marriage vision alignment can sometimes be the most challenging. But what I would say is I liken it to almost like a volleyball game where someone volleys some vision and they just throw something at the wall, they volley it, the other person receives it and they volley back like their vision, and you just start volleying a bit until you actually get everything out on paper. Both sides are really throwing what they have out onto the table. And then it just becomes a game of alignment, right? Where it's like, hey, how do we align on something here that's going to really move us forward? And so I think like looking for common patterns, looking for things, common wins that both parties want. Of course, there's compromise in the midst of some of it. In a business setting, sometimes there's even like a higher rank where it's like, hey, this is the vision for the organization, but I'm looking for your individual vision within the larger context of the organization. So it gives it gives that younger leader something to own and to go create within the larger umbrella of the organization's vision. So sometimes that can help make things a little bit clearer and a more pointed in what you're creating with vision. But ultimately, you really want to have something at the end where you're both aligned and you both are staring at something going like, whoa, that is a snapshot of a future that produces passion and energy for me that I want to go jump into today.
Cool.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that I found just really intriguing about, some of the challenges that you proposed to me, um, was that idea of like it doesn't have to be one or the other, like either or kind of thinking. Can you explain a little bit of that, and then how it ties to vision too? Because especially when you're collaborating with somebody, we can think like either we win or they win, but it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be that way all the time.
Yeah, that's a really common pattern that the brain falls into is either or thinking. Like, you know, I work with entrepreneurs and, they want to grow their business. And it's like either I can have a rockin', growth filled business next year, uh, and like a crappy home life, like, or I can pour all my time into my family and kids and, my business suffers. And we just get into these dichotomous mindsets. And I think that's just an absence of somebody saying, hey, what if you could have a rockin' business next year and a new vision for your family that you love pouring into? And it's just, again, we're giving the brain like a new puzzle to solve and saying, what would that look like? You're not committed to any of it right now. We're just throwing it on the table to see what sticks. And so shifting from either or to both and can sometimes be a fun exercise just to see what comes out. And again, your brain is so powerful and it loves being right. So the question is, what are we giving your brain to be right about? Like, what puzzle are we inviting it to go solve? So look, if we give it like an either, so if we give it a both and puzzle to solve, your brain starts coming up with all kinds of creative solutions to go, oh, okay, well, if my vision is to be home at 3:30 every day to pick up my kids from school and I want to double my business next year, how would I do that?
Mm.
And again, your brain just starts going to work. Like, oh, well, maybe I'll hire somebody that I trust. Maybe I have an agreement with my wife where I do that 3 days a week and the other 2 days I don't. Like it starts getting super creative to go solve for that problem. Therefore, so you don't get stuck in that either or thinking.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So I want to move to that next section that I feel like was emerging as we were talking about working together,
Mm,
accomplishing really cool things on the frontier lands of your life. So we talked about vision. The next one I want to talk about is risk, the thing that kind of emerged at the beginning of our conversation.
yeah.
Um, I love the idea of being okay with risk, especially when it comes to like a relationship with like, your wife or with people around you, like on your team, like I mentioned. Um, what do you feel like is people's normal relationship to risk when they're working together? And then how can relationship actually be really valuable in like collaborative environments?
Mm, yeah. So what is to repeat the first question, I think what I heard you say is how do people relate to risk in the conversation?
Yeah, so the way that I see it is like I'm happy to risk so much when I'm on my own.
Gotcha.
No one else is going to be affected by my risk for the
Hmm.
most part. But then when you're working with a team, like, and you guys decide to do some risky stuff and go out into the frontier lands and adventure, there's
Hmm.
like so many more stakes. So most people don't enter into those risky environments. So
Hmm.
that's kind of where my head's at.
Yeah, no, I love that. Well, if I were holding the space for a team, I'd start getting curious around the belief systems that might be holding people back from taking that risky next step. And of course, your risk tolerance changes the more expertise and the longer you have in the seat. So, somebody that you know, trades risky stocks all day long, if they have more time in the seat, their risk is way lower, obviously, than maybe mine because I'm just getting started. So I think like, who's at the helm of this ship is a good question when you're assessing risk. But at the same time, I think, oftentimes there are a couple things that slow down risk. Like I call them like the survival needs, right? So looking good, feeling good, being right, or being in control, those survival needs often shrink someone's understanding of their capacity and their capabilities because they don't want it to feel ooey gooey weird when I pick up the phone to make that call, or they don't, they're poring over this email for an hour when in reality it could be a 15-minute email because they just got to get it right. There's these survival needs that sometimes come into play. And I think when you're working with a group in a group environment, it's helpful just to say, "Hey, can we just be honest for a minute and just start truth telling or confessing some of the belief systems that are on our hearts?" Because oftentimes it's just mental frameworks that are keeping people from stepping into risk,
Mhm,
and it's just helpful to daylight some of those belief systems that are keeping people from taking that courageous step.
mhm,
And then once it's on paper, you can assess it and go, okay, like, are these belief systems true? Are they serving us? Right? Like, what belief systems would serve us in this situation that would serve the vision? A good example would be, uh, well, I'm blanking. I have like more of like a theoretical example, not like a real example.
Theoretical's good too.
Yeah. Well, like a good example would be like you and your team are sitting around a table, you're talking about, let's say, uh, you're sitting around a table and you're talking about engaging like all 32 cities in Orange County.
Mhm.
And currently, yeah, sorry, I've made that mistake before.
You're good. You're good.
Yeah, you and your team are sitting around a table and you're thinking, and Trellis is thinking about engaging all 34 cities in this massive, incredible movement that they're up to.
Mhm,
And there's some big gaps. There's some cities that just aren't responding. They aren't connecting with some of the initial reach outs, that you guys are making to connect with them. Um, and it might take like a dedicated crew of leaders to really press in and to go have some courageous conversations with some of these leaders. And, you know, the mindsets that might be coming back are, what if they say no? Like what if they're not interested in our frameworks and our ways of doing this? I've never done this before. You may have some team members, some new leaders that you're raising up that have never done this before. And yet the vision of what Trellis is creating is inviting people to go step out in courage to go create some of these conversations. And I'm sure you've been at those tables where like you're saying to yourself, I've never done this before, and yet the vision is calling you in.
mhm,
And so I think just like daylighting that, inviting truth in, inviting older mentors and leaders to speak into the space, like all that helps mitigate some of the risks so that you can go take that leap. And it's incredible when people actually commit their word to something and they say, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to go have that initial conversation. And they come back and you ask them how did it go? And of course, it usually goes great. And and so much courage like floods into the system because they have done something that they never thought possible. And all of a sudden the flywheel and the momentum starts. And I think that's a really special time for an organization to start experiencing is when that momentous flywheel of courage and risk starts moving because people start creating believability that they could create with their words, create with their actions, and it fills them with this sense of purpose and alignment with who they've been made to be. And then it's just like, man, what else do we want to go create? And it really just like starts these little fires like in all the different team members and it really starts moving the organization forward.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So I you kind of like went into the last question that I wanted to ask you, which was perfect. I wanted to ask you after you have like a clear vision and then you've also stepped into risk and uncomfortability, then what
Mhm.
happens after that? And you're saying that a flywheel of courage and excitement kind of forms then. And then what do you usually see for people? Yeah, let's just stick to a team conversation. What do you usually see for teams once that like flywheel starts to like be a part of their culture, even in the, not just internally, because we're talking a little bit about what happens within their team, but just outside of their team in the world around them.
Yeah, it's so good. Well, I think what really starts happening when this culture starts setting in is the team no longer is satisfied with the default future. And what I mean by that is the default future is typically you look backwards to go create what you're going to create going forwards. So like, business might be like, hey, we grew 3% last year, let's do another 3% this year. And they're just designing from the past. And the problem with that is when you design from the default future, you end up carrying the limitations, gaps, and stories and narratives from the past to go inform what you're going to create in the future. And so when a culture really shifts into that flywheel growth that I was talking about, they start getting hungry and they start realizing that they have capacity to cast vision. They have ownership within the organization to have individual visions within the larger vision. And it's really cool to see some of the leaders of those organizations, their fences start expanding and they go, wow, we actually have live employees that really care about what they're up to, what they're creating, their own personal growth within the larger vision of the organization. And you go to your year-end planning meetings for the following year and you come out fired up because of what people are laying on the table. And you're often, I think it's such a joy as like a founder or a CEO to be in those conversations because you start realizing that your team has now started taking ownership of the vision and they're starting to create at a higher level than you could have even imagined because they're made in the image of God. Like they have these imago days in them and it's like the more that we can nurture that out of them, the more that you start creating even more than you imagined. So that's a really fun thing to see when an organization really takes off in that way.
That's awesome. So just to kind of wrap up, I think I love to just connect the dots.
Mm.
And I've just been trying to connect the dots as you're talking, just because I think it helps me and it helps other people. So, number one, clear vision. I'm writing it down too as we're talking. Number two, like risk and adventure. Number three, the result of these two is a courage flywheel. And then lastly, like team ownership when everyone's carrying an amazing
Mm.
vision that they never would have imagined living into. So, out of those things, like what would you want to leave? Like the audience, if you could give them like one or two really key principles to leave out of that conversation, what would those be?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is just just holding a space for different members on your team to birth vision. To just like I mentioned at the beginning of the call, rarely are we sitting down at coffee or in team meetings and just asking people individually like, hey, given what you know about the organization and what we're creating, what's your vision for next year? What do you want to create? And oftentimes that can be a little bit of a hairy question or sometimes even scary for leaders to ask because there's a fear that like whatever comes out of that person's mouth might be like drastically different than what the organization wants to do, right? And some of that is just contextual framing of like saying, hey, within this vision, what's your vision, right? So there's an art to that. Or sometimes you find out that that person's not there's some misalignment, within the organization and what they're here to create. But just to answer your question shortly is just to start asking the question like, hey, what's your vision for next year? What do you, or another thing too is, you can have a vision about anything. It doesn't have to be just for the year. It could be, hey, what's your vision going into this sales meeting that we're going into on Thursday? Would love to hear what you want to create.
Yeah.
Right? Like just something like that. Or hey, what's your vision for your vacation this year with your family? I mean, you can have a vision about anything. And I think once you start laying that out, giving your brain something to be right about, it just wants to go create it just naturally. And it needs just a few little support structures and people asking how's it going to keep it moving in that direction. So I'd say that's a huge principle that I'd love to encourage people on as they
Yeah.
as they step out of this podcast.
That's cool because I think at the very beginning you mentioned like some people never even get asked that question.
Yeah.
Even just in the act of asking them, it will open up like an entire world for them. So,
And I would say when you do ask that, you get this beautiful snapshot of someone's life and their desires of their heart and what they're made for and what they want to create. And if someone tells you their vision for next year, especially in the context of a friendship or even a work relationship, you know how to serve them for the next year
mhm,
because you asked them like, hey, what are you creating? What are you up to? What's on your heart? What's the frontier land of your life?
mhm.
And all of a sudden, it really helps deepen the relationship in a really powerful way because you know how to encourage and serve and guide if possible, even on that journey.
That's cool. I think this is such a timely conversation too, because I'm thinking about next year. A lot of people are thinking about
Mm.
next year, and they're
Yeah.
thinking about not only how to build a vision for themselves, but in the world around them,
Mm.
in their marriage, relationships, teams, and all that. So thank you so much for talking. So
Yeah.
if people wanted to find you, how could they do that?
Yeah, you can go to my website, fortiv.co, FORTIV.co. I've also got a website on Spotify, or I've also got a podcast on Spotify called it's. I've also got a I've also got a podcast on Spotify called Alive with Courage. And yeah, there's some great conversations there that kind of dig into some of the nitty-gritty of what we've been up to. And really just it's a podcast that just is talking about people that are stepping out into the world alive with courage. So it's fun to hear the stories that are coming out of that space.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Seth. And for those of you who are following along, make sure that you stay in touch for the next episode. Every episode will come out 2 weeks, 2 weeks apart from each other, so every 2 weeks. And usually Ian will be on as a co-host with us as well, and we'll hope to get some great conversations going, like the one today. And if you want to learn more about the bigger vision of what we're a part of in our city and our county, go to wearecharlis.com and you can find out what we're doing here in Orange County. But hopefully, this is serving you in whatever context you're in, whether you're trying to create unity in your relationship with God, in your close relationships like marriage, dating, family, work, or larger community. And we're just so grateful that you guys joined us for this conversation. We will see you in the next one.